In the shadow of the Great Pyramids, where the mighty Nile carved life through golden sands, lived Nefertari, a peasant woman with calloused hands but a gentle heart. Her simple mud brick home stood apart from the village, surrounded by date palms and the whispers of ancient gods. When a sandstorm brought a mysterious traveler to her door one evening, she offered shelter without question. The stranger's eyes held wisdom beyond his apparent years, his hands too smooth for a common merchant. As they shared a humble meal by firelight, she spoke openly of her dreams, unaware that her kindness was being measured by the most powerful man in all Egypt. The first light of Ra stretched across the eastern horizon, painting the mud brick homes in hues of amber and gold. Nefertari had been awake for an hour already, her fingers working deftly at the wooden loom that occupied the central space in her modest dwelling. The rhythmic click-clack of the shuttle passing through the threads had been the soundtrack to her mornings for nearly 15 years now, ever since old Bastet had taught her the craft. The gods give each of us one gift, Bastet had told her. Yours is in your hand. Those hands, now calloused and strong, moved with practiced precision. The blue thread, rare and expensive, was being used sparingly, interwoven with the more common white to create a pattern that merchants from the north would pay handsomely for. Such a sale would mean grain for 3 months, perhaps 4 if she was frugal. Outside, the village stirred to life. Children's laughter floated through her open window, along with the scent of baking bread and the distant lowing of cattle being led to pasture. Nefertari paused, stretching her back before reaching for her water jug, the same one from which she had offered drink to the stranger last night. The stranger. There had been something in his eyes, something that spoke of distant places and knowledge beyond the world she knew. Not that travelers were uncommon along the trade routes, but this one seemed different, less hardened by the road, more observant, as if he were seeing everything for the first time. Nefertari, are you awake, child? The cracked voice of Khepri, eldest of the village women, called from outside. Yes, Mother Khepri. Come in, please. The old woman ducked through the low doorway, her bent frame making the motion seem almost natural. In her hands she carried a small bundle of herbs, for your headaches, she explained, placing them on the table. Steep them when the moon is highest. It will help. Nefertari smiled, touching the elder's hand in thanks. You remember everything. When you live as long as I have, the past is often clearer than the present. Khepri's eyes, clouded with age, but still sharp with intelligence, scanned the room. You had a visitor last night. During the storm, news traveled quickly, even when carried on old legs. A traveler caught in the sand, nothing more. Khepri's expression remained neutral, but her eyes twinkled with the wisdom of years. Men who travel during storms are either fools or those with purpose too great to be delayed, or simply unfortunate, Nefertari countered, returning to her loom. The headman asks when you will finish the ceremonial cloth for his daughter's wedding. He grows impatient. Nefertari's hands stilled momentarily. Tell him it will be ready when the new moon comes. Quality cannot be rushed, even for the headman. Khepri chuckled, a sound like dry papyrus rustling. Bold words from an orphan girl. Bold words from the finest weaver between here and Thebes. Nefertari corrected, without arrogance. It was simply truth, acknowledged even by those who found her independence subtling. After Khepri left, Nefertari worked until midday, when the heat became too oppressive. She covered her loom carefully, then gathered her empty water jugs. The walk to the river was long but familiar, a path she had traveled since childhood. Along the banks of the Nile, women gathered to wash clothes, fill water vessels, and exchange the currency of village life, gossip. Nefertari nodded respectfully to the wives and mothers, but maintained her distance. Years ago, their whispers had cut like knives, speculating about the strange child with no parents, found wandering after the fever took her family. Now, their words held a different edge, weariness of a woman who lived alone, who traded directly with merchants, who needed no husband to survive. They say Pharaoh travels among us, one woman said loudly enough for all to hear. Disguised as a common man, observing how his subjects truly live. Old tales to frighten children into behaving, another scoffed. Why would the living God walk among the dust, when he has all of Egypt's pleasures at his feet? Nefertari dipped her jug into the cool water, listening but not participating. Pharaoh Amenhotep was just a distant figure to her, a name invoked during planting season, a face on temple walls, the reason behind the tax collector's visit. His world of gold and lapis lazuli had nothing to do with her world of clay and linen. As she straightened, balancing the heavy water jug on her head, Nefertari gazed across the mighty river. Sometimes, in quiet moments like this, a familiar ache bloomed in her chest. Not quite loneliness, but awareness of all she had never known. Family, belonging. The comfort of sharing life's burden. Within the alabaster walls of the royal palace, Pharaoh Amenhotep stood motionless as servants draped the heavy gold collar around his neck. Through the open balcony, a gentle breeze carried the scent of lotus blossoms from the gardens below, a pleasant respite from the oppressive weight of royal regalia. The delegation from Nubia awaits your majesty's pleasure in the Eastern Hall, intoned Senefer, his chief steward, a man whose efficiency was matched only by his devotion to protocol. They bring tribute of gold and ebony. After them, the high priest requests an audience regarding the upcoming festival of Osiris. Amenhotep nodded, his face a careful mask that revealed nothing of his growing weariness. Since his father's death 3 moons past, the demands of kingship had been relentless, an endless procession of supplicants, ceremonies, and decisions that would affect thousands. And the matter of your majesty's marriage, Senefer added carefully, his eyes downcast in appropriate deference. Not today, Amenhotep replied, his voice carrying the quiet authority that brooked no argument, even from those who had known him since childhood. The marriage proposals had been arriving since his coronation, noble daughters from every nome in Egypt, princesses from allied kingdoms, all offering political advantage and divine bloodlines suitable for the living Horus. Their portraits lined his private chambers, beautiful faces rendered in exquisite detail by the finest artists, yet none had stirred anything within him beyond cool assessment of potential alliances. When the last piece of ceremonial attire was in place, Amenhotep dismissed the servants with a gesture. Only Nuk, his bodyguard and oldest friend, remained. Another day of nodding wisely while old men speak, Nuk observed with the familiarity that only decades of shared history could permit. They mean well, Amenhotep replied, adjusting the simple linen kilt beneath his elaborate overskirt. But they see Egypt as it was, not as it could be. Nuk's scarred face remained impassive. And how do you see it, my king? Amenhotep walked to the balcony, gazing over the sprawling city that stretched toward the horizon. From this height, the mud-brick homes of his subjects appeared as orderly as the stone-cut tombs in the Valley of Kings. I see a land whose strength lies not in gold or monuments, but in its people. He gestured toward the distant fields where tiny figures moved among the crops. Yet I know them no better than they know me. I am a god to them, Nukt, not a man, not a ruler they can understand. The old soldier's eyes narrowed slightly. You have that look again. What look? The one your father called your troublesome thinking face. A rare smile briefly crossed Nukt's weathered features. What are you planning? Amenhotep turned, decision crystallizing. Prepare traveling clothes. Simple ones, and find Posatep. I need his counsel. Hours later, in a chamber few knew existed, Pharaoh Amenhotep stood transformed, gone with the royal uraeus, the ceremonial beard, the golden sandals in their place. A simple traveler's cloak of undyed wool, plain leather sandals worn at the edges, a merchant's bag containing a few trade goods. Posatep, royal vizier and keeper of secrets, circled his king with a critical eye. The disguise is adequate, though your posture remains too regal. The old man's voice carried both concern and disapproval. Your Majesty, I must again counsel against this. The dangers are necessary risks. Amenhotep interrupted. My father never left these walls except in procession. He never heard an honest word from a subject's mouth. I will not rule from inside a golden cage. At least take a proper guard, Ptahhotep pleaded. Nakht and 2 others will follow at a distance. Any more would defeat the purpose. Amenhotep pulled the hood of his cloak forward, casting his face in shadow. I will travel upriver, visiting villages along the way. 10 days, no more. And the delegation from Nubia. Tell them Pharaoh contemplates their offerings in seclusion, seeking divine guidance. Amenhotep smiled at the irony. It is not entirely untrue. Ptahhotep sighed in resignation. As you command, living Horus. For the next 10 days I am simply Amenhotep, a merchant of modest means. He secured the simple wooden clasp of his cloak, so different from the jeweled pins he normally wore. No one will look twice at me. That, my king, said Ptahhotep with unexpected wisdom, may be the greatest revelation of your journey. As dusk fell, a small, unremarkable boat slipped away from a rarely used dock below the palace. Standing at its prow, Amenhotep breathed deeply, tasting freedom in the night air. Ahead lay villages he had only seen from procession barges, people whose lives were as foreign to him as the distant lands beyond Nubia. Behind him, Nakht kept silent watch, his experienced eyes scanning constantly for threats. His hand never strayed far from his weapon, concealed beneath simple clothing that nonetheless failed to disguise his warrior's bearing. The Nile carried them forward, away from the center of power and toward its source, both the rivers and Amenhotep hoped, his own understanding of what it truly meant to rule Egypt. The wind changed first, a subtle shift that Amenhotep might not have noticed had he not spent his youth studying with priests who read nature's warnings. The air grew still, unnaturally so, and carried a faint, metallic taste. On the horizon the sky darkened to an ominous amber, sandstorm, not murmured, appearing suddenly at his side. A severe one judging by the color. Amenhotep nodded, scanning their surroundings. They had been traveling for 4 days, visiting 3 villages along the Nile. This morning they had ventured inland toward a settlement known for its weavers, hoping to maintain his merchant disguise by acquiring goods. How far to the next village? He asked, calculating distances in his mind. Too far, Nakht replied grimly. We should return to the boat. But even as he spoke, the wind began to rise again, carrying the first stinging particles of sand. The distant amber had become a towering wall of ochre and brown, advancing with frightening speed. There, Amenhotep pointed to a solitary dwelling set apart from the main village path, its mud-brick walls sturdy against the elements. We'll seek shelter there. Nakht signaled to the 2 guards following at a distance, directing them to find their own shelter elsewhere. Too many strangers arriving together would raise suspicions. As the wind howled louder, Amenhotep pulled his cloak tighter and quickened his pace. Nakht close behind. The first real blast of sand-laden wind nearly knocked them off their feet as they reached the dwelling's entrance. Amenhotep pounded on the wooden door, hoping to be heard over the storm's growing fury. The door opened suddenly, revealing a woman silhouetted against warm light from within. Without hesitation, she pulled them inside and swiftly secured the door against the howling wind. Sit, she commanded, gesturing toward a simple reed mat. The worst is yet to come. In the flickering light of an oil lamp, Amenhotep saw her clearly, tall for a woman, with strong shoulders and hands that spoke of regular labor. Her face, framed by dark hair tied simply back, carried a quiet dignity that struck him immediately. This was no deferential peasant, but a woman who stood firmly in her own authority. I thank you for your hospitality, he said, adopting the accent and mannerisms he had practiced. I am Amenhotep, a merchant from the north. Nefertari, she replied simply, moving to secure shutters against the intensifying storm. You chose a poor day to travel these roads, merchant. The storm came without warning, Nakht said gruffly, positioning himself between his disguised king and their host. A bodyguard's instinct impossible to fully suppress. Sandstorms always give warning, Nefertari countered. If one knows how to listen. She regarded them with a measuring look. You are not local. The villagers have been expecting this storm since yesterday. Amenhotep smiled, finding her directness refreshing after years of courtiers who couched every observation in layers of flattery. Then we must learn to listen better. Are we imposing on your household? A flash of something, amusement perhaps, crossed her features. I live alone, but my home is secure against the storm. You may remain until it passes. As she busied herself with practical matters, checking that sand wasn't infiltrating through cracks, adding oil to the lamp, Amenhotep observed her home with genuine curiosity. It was modest yet meticulously organized. A loom dominated one corner, with partially completed work of remarkable craftsmanship stretched across it. Bundles of dyed thread hung from the rafters, and simple pottery lined a shelf along one wall. You are a weaver, he observed. And you are observant, she replied with the hint of a smile, setting down a clay vessel of water before them. Drink. The air grows dry during storms. As the wind shrieked outside, rattling the sturdy shutters, Nefertari kindled a small cooking fire in the central hearth. The familiar domestic action, performed with practiced efficiency, struck Amenhotep with unexpected poignancy. How long had it been since he had seen someone prepare food without ceremony or pretense? Your work shows exceptional skill, he said, gesturing toward the loom. I have seen fine weaving in Memphis and Thebes that does not compare. Have you traveled widely then, merchant? She asked, her tone conversational yet subtly probing. Widely enough, he answered carefully, though there is always more of Egypt to see. And what do you see in your travels? The question came as she stirred a simple stew, her back to him. Do you find Egypt prosperous under our divine Pharaoh? Nak tensed slightly, but Amenhotep leaned forward, genuinely interested in her perspective. What do you believe? He countered. She turned, meeting his gaze directly in a way no one at court would dare. In the lamplight, her eyes held both intelligence and caution. I believe, she said deliberately, that those who rule rarely understand the lives of those they govern. Outside, the storm reached its full intensity, sand hissing against the walls like thousands of whispering voices. But inside, illuminated by the steady flame of a simple oil lamp, a conversation began that would change the course of 2 lives, and perhaps of Egypt itself. The storm raged outside, while inside, the fragrant steam from Nefertari's cooking pot filled the small dwelling with the scent of cumin and coriander. She ladled the simple stew of lentils and vegetables into 3 clay bowls, offering the first to Amenhotep with a fluid movement that bore no hint of servility. You did not answer my question, she said, settling on a low stool across from him. About whether Egypt prospers under Pharaoh. Amenhotep accepted the bowl, aware of Nok's carefully controlled tension beside him. This was dangerous territory for their disguise, yet her directness made evasion seem dishonest. I believe, he said carefully, that Egypt's strength has always been in its people, not its rulers. Though a wise ruler recognizes this truth. Diplomatic words for a merchant, she observed, breaking a piece of flatbread. You speak like a scribe. My father valued education, he replied, truthfully. And you? Do you find wisdom in directness where others might choose caution? Her eyes met his over the rim of her bowl. Caution keeps one safe. Directness keeps one honest. Both have their place. She gestured toward the storm-battered shutters. But in my home, with a storm raging outside, what harm can come from honest words? Nut cleared his throat. Perhaps we should speak of less weighty matters. The stew is excellent. Nefertari's slight smile acknowledged the deflection. A simple meal tastes better when shared. Even my humble cooking improves with company. Do you not entertain often? Amenhotep asked. The village has its opinions about women who live alone, she replied matter-of-factly. I trade my cloth, attend festivals, fulfill my obligations to the community. But my home remains my own. By choice. By circumstance at first. By choice thereafter. She set her empty bowl aside. And you, merchant, does a family await your return in the north? Amenhotep felt the strange liberation of his disguise. No careful diplomatic answer was required. No consideration of royal dignity. No family, he said simply. My work keeps me isolated, even when surrounded by others. Something in his tone must have revealed more than he intended, for her expression softened almost imperceptibly. That is the truest kind of solitude. The conversation flowed more easily after that, turning to lighter subjects. Nefertari spoke of local traditions, of the seasonal rhythms of village life, of the colorful characters who populated her world. Amenhotep found himself laughing genuinely at her observations, sharp and unvarnished yet never cruel. And then old Kanshumu insisted the crocodile had stolen his best fishing net, she recounted, eyes bright with amusement, until his wife found it buried under their grain storage, where he'd hidden it to avoid lending it to his brother-in-law. People are the same everywhere, Amenhotep observed, thinking of the courtiers who schemed over royal favors with similar pettiness, albeit with higher stakes. Are they? She challenged gently. I've always wondered if those born to privilege view the world differently than those who labor each day for bread. Nak tensed again, but Amenhotep found himself unwilling to retreat behind polite falsehoods. They do, he admitted, though perhaps not in the ways you might imagine. Wealth does not guarantee wisdom, nor does power ensure understanding. Spoken like someone who has observed both, she noted, her perceptiveness unsettling. The oil lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows across the mud-brick walls. Outside, the storm's fury had begun to subside, the howling wind diminishing to an occasional moan. May I? Amenhotep asked, gesturing toward her loom. She nodded, and he rose to examine the half-finished cloth, genuinely impressed by the intricacy of the pattern. His fingers, more accustomed to holding ceremonial scepters than touching the tools of daily labor, traced the taut threads with reverence. The blue dye, he commented. From the Far Eastern provinces. Yes, she confirmed, coming to stand beside him. Expensive, but necessary for the quality I require. The merchant who supplies it claims it comes from beyond the two lands, where the sky meets the earth. I have seen such places, he said softly, momentarily forgetting his disguise, where the heavens seem close enough to touch, and colors exist that we have no names for in our language. Something shifted in her expression, curiosity perhaps, or recognition of a shared appreciation for beauty beyond the ordinary. For a moment they stood in silence, the pattern of woven threads between them forming an unexpected connection. You are an unusual merchant, she said finally, her voice quiet but direct. And you are an unusual weaver, he countered with a smile. The storm outside had calmed enough that they could hear the occasional call of night birds returning to roost. Their time of shelter was coming to a natural end, and Amenhotep felt a strange reluctance at the prospect of departure. The worst has passed, Nautad observed, already preparing to leave. We should continue our journey while light remains. Nefertari nodded, gathering their empty bowls with efficient movements. The path to the river will be clear enough, though watch for scorpions. The storm drives them from their hiding places. As they prepared to depart, Amenhotep felt the weight of his deception with unexpected heaviness. This woman had shared her home, her food, her thoughts freely, while he had offered carefully curated half-truths in return. At the doorway, he paused. Your hospitality honors the finest traditions of Egypt, he said formally, then added with genuine feeling, I am in your debt, Nefertari, the weaver. Safe travels, Amenhotep the merchant, she replied, standing tall in her doorway as they stepped back into the sand-scoured world beyond. The royal barge glided silently across the great hall of audience, carried on the shoulders of 20 servants whose footsteps were muffled by training and fear. Upon this ornate vessel of gold and cedar, Pharaoh Amenhotep sat motionless, the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt adding nearly a foot to his height, the ceremonial false beard affixed to his chin with fragrant resin. 3 days had passed since his return from the journey among his people, 3 days of resuming the careful choreography of royal existence, the rituals, the audiences, the constant presence of attendants monitoring his every need before it could be expressed. Before him knelt the mayor of Abydos, forehead pressed to the polished floor, voice trembling as he detailed the completion of new granaries. The man had been speaking for several minutes, yet Amenhotep found his thoughts drifting repeatedly to a simple mud-brick dwelling and the woman whose direct gaze had contained no trace of the fear he saw in every face at court. "Your Majesty." Tehutep's discreet prompt brought him back to the present moment. The vizier's carefully neutral expression revealed nothing, but Amenhotep recognized the concern. It was not like him to lose focus during audiences. "The granaries are a credit to Abydos and its leadership," he pronounced, the formal cadence of royal speech returning automatically. "Let the record show our pleasure at this diligence. The tax assessments shall reflect our favor." Relief visibly washed over the mayor's prostrate form. He backed away, still bent low, murmuring elaborate thanks that Amenhotep barely registered. When the last petitioner had been dismissed, Tehutep approached the throne with a scroll in hand. "The delegation from Nubia grows restless, Divine One. They have waited 7 days now. Schedule them for tomorrow's morning audience," Amenhotep replied, removing the heavy crown with a barely concealed sigh of relief. The royal seal ring on his finger caught the light. A simple circle of gold with the sacred cartouche, yet it weighed more heavily than all his other regalia combined. "And the matter of marriage negotiations?" the vizier ventured carefully. Amenhotep's expression closed. "That will wait," the court whispers. "Great Horus," Tep said, lowering his voice, though they were now alone except for the deaf slaves who attended the sacred person of Pharaoh. "The priests speak of omens. A king without a queen cannot ensure the continuation of divine bloodlines. The priests find omens in the pattern of flies on meat," Amenhotep observed dryly. "Egypt has survived 17 days without a queen. I suspect it can endure a few more." Later in his private chambers, Amenhotep dismissed even his personal attendants, a rare request that raised eyebrows but could not be denied. Alone, he moved to the balcony overlooking the palace gardens, where artificial pools reflected the stars now appearing in the darkening sky. The contrast with Nefertari's home could not have been more pronounced. Here, every surface gleamed with gold or precious stone. The very air was perfumed. Even the water that filled his washing basin had been carried from a sacred spring hundreds of miles distant. Yet for all its opulence, the royal chamber felt suddenly airless, confined, a beautiful cage from which he could observe the world but never truly touch it. A discreet knock announced Nock's arrival. Unlike others at court, his old friend entered without ceremony, closing the door firmly behind him. "You've been distracted since our return," the soldier observed bluntly. Amenhotep did not turn from his contemplation of the gardens. "Have I been so obvious?" "Only to those who know you well." Noct moved to stand beside him at the balcony. "The weaver woman. It wasn't a question. She spoke to me as a person. Noct. Not as a god, not as a king. Do you know how long it has been since anyone did that?" Amenhotep ran a hand over the smooth stone of the balustrade. "In her home I was judged by my words, not my title. Dangerous thinking, my king." "Necessary thinking," Amenhotep countered. "How can I rule people whose lives I cannot understand, whose concerns I cannot share?" Noct's weathered face remained impassive, but concern flickered in his eyes. "What are you considering?" Amenhotep turned the royal seal ring on his finger thoughtfully. "Another journey, shorter this time, To the same village. To see the weaver again, Noct stated flatly. To continue learning what cannot be learned from within these walls, Amenhotep corrected, though the deflection felt hollow even to his own ears. Noct studied his king's face for a long moment before sighing. When, 3 days hence, after the Nubian delegation departs, Amenhotep's decision crystallized as he spoke. We'll travel as before, simple garb, minimal escort. The council will object to another absence so soon. The council need not know the true purpose. Amenhotep's lips curved in a slight smile. Tell them I go to inspect the temple restoration at Dendara. It's close enough to justify the journey. Outside in the garden, a nightingale began to sing, its melody carrying clearly through the still evening air. Amenhotep listened, struck by how the simple bird's song seemed more authentic than the elaborate court musicians who had performed during the evening meal. Knight, he said quietly, have you ever wondered if the gods placed us in the wrong life? The old soldier's expression softened almost imperceptibly. No, my king, but I have wondered if sometimes they allow us glimpses of different paths to better appreciate the one we walk. Amenhotep nodded slowly, his fingers unconsciously touching the hidden pocket where he had secreted a small strand of blue thread, taken from the floor of a weaver's hut as a private remembrance of a moment of simple truth. The village market hummed with activity, merchants calling their wares, customers haggling over prices, children darting between stalls on mysterious errands of their own. Amenhotep moved through this tapestry of ordinary life with a sense of wonder carefully concealed behind his merchant's demeanor. He had timed this second visit to coincide with the monthly market day, when traders from upriver and down gathered to exchange goods. It provided perfect cover for his presence. One merchant among many would draw little attention. There, Nak murmured, nodding toward a stall at the market's edge. Nefertari stood behind a simple wooden table, her woven goods arranged with careful precision. Even from a distance, the quality of her work was evident, the vibrant colors and intricate patterns drawing the eye naturally. She conducted her business with quiet confidence, neither aggressive in her sales pitch like some merchants, nor overly deferential to potential customers. Amenhotep approached casually, examining the fabrics on display. When her eyes met his, he saw the brief flash of recognition, quickly masked. The merchant from the north, she observed, her tone neutral. The storm did not drive you permanently away, I see. It would take more than sand to keep me from returning to a place of interest, he replied, fingering a length of finely woven linen. Your work remains exceptional. Her expression softened slightly. You have an eye for quality. Most merchants look only at what will sell quickly, not what will endure. I brought something for you, he said, reaching into his traveling pouch, a small repayment for your hospitality. From a protected inner pocket, he withdrew a small clay jar sealed with wax. The contents had been procured from royal stores, though he had been careful to transfer them to a common container. Indigo, he explained, as she accepted the gift with curious hands. From lands far to the east. I thought, for your blue thread. Her eyes widened as she recognized the value of what he offered. Genuine indigo dye was rare even in palace workshops, let alone in a rural village. This is too valuable, she protested, attempting to return it. Not between friends, he countered gently. And I hope we might be that. Something shifted in her expression, wariness giving way to cautious warmth. The market closes at midday, she said after a thoughtful pause. If you return to my dwelling then, I will prepare a meal to properly thank you for such generosity. The hours until midday passed with agonizing slowness. Amenhotep made a show of conducting business, purchasing items he had no need for simply to maintain his merchant disguise. Nak remained watchful, his experienced eyes constantly scanning for any sign of recognition or threat. When they finally approached Nefertari's dwelling, Amenhotep was surprised to find himself uncharacteristically nervous, a sensation he had not experienced since his first appearance before the full court as Pharaoh. She welcomed them with dignified hospitality, her home unchanged yet somehow more familiar than before. The loom still dominated the main room, but now a partially completed work displayed an intricate pattern of blues and golds that had not been present during their first visit. "You've started something new," he observed, gesturing toward the loom. "Inspired by the sky after a storm," she replied, moving to prepare a simple meal. "When the clouds part and the light changes from moment to moment." As she worked, the conversation flowed more easily than before, building on the foundation of their previous meeting. Amenhotep found himself speaking of travels throughout Egypt, carefully editing his experiences to maintain his disguise while sharing genuine observation. "The temple at Karnak," she said, eyes brightening with interest. "Is it truly as magnificent as they say?" "More so," he replied. "Truthfully, the Hapa-style hall contains columns so vast that 50 men joining hands could not encircle them. When sunlight streams through the upper windows, it seems as though the gods themselves are reaching down to touch the earth." "You describe it as a poet would, not a merchant," she observed, placing a bowl of stewed dates and honey before him. "Perhaps in another life, I might have been a scribe or priest," he deflected with a smile. "We all contain many possible lives within us, do we not?" Her eyes met his with unexpected intensity. "Some of us are permitted to explore those possibilities. Others must simply imagine them." The honesty of her response struck him deeply. As Pharaoh, he possessed unlimited power by any worldly measure, yet he was more constrained in many ways than this village weaver. "Tell me of your life," he requested softly. "Not the weaving or the market, but what shaped Nefertari into who she is today." She was silent for a moment, seemingly weighing his worthiness to receive such confidences. Then, with characteristic directness, she began to speak of her childhood, the fever that had claimed her family when she was young, the elderly weaver, who had taken her in as an apprentice, the years of learning her craft while navigating the complex social structures of village life as an orphan. "When Bastet died, my teacher, there was debate about what should become of me," she explained, her hands busy preparing a sweet herb tea. "I was 17, unmarried, with no family to speak for me. The headman's wife wanted me to become a household servant. Others suggested suitable marriages. And yet here you are, independent," Amenhotep observed. A small, proud smile touched her lips. "I had already established a reputation for my weaving. I convinced the village council that my work brought more prestige and trade than would my service in someone's home or my binding to a husband with no appreciation for my craft. A diplomatic victory worthy of a royal envoy," he commented, genuine admiration in his voice. "Necessity teaches skills no formal education can provide," she replied simply. As the afternoon light began to soften toward evening, Amenhotep reluctantly acknowledged that they must depart. The royal barge waited downriver, concealed in a secluded inlet, ready to return him to the palace under cover of darkness. At the doorway, Nefertari presented him with a small token, a delicately woven bracelet of blue and gold threads. "For luck in your travels," she said, "and perhaps to remember our conversations." As Amenhotep secured it around his wrist, he made a decision that Nock's subtle headshake could not deter. "I will return," he promised quietly. "In 1 month's time, when the moon is full again." Her expression remained composed, but something in her eyes, hope, perhaps, or simple pleasure, warmed him more deeply than the richest wines in the royal cellars ever had. The living Horus has been absent from the palace grounds 4 times in the past 2 months. Ayarete of the royal treasury observed in carefully measured tones, always with minimal escort, always with explanations that satisfy public curiosity, yet reveal little. The chamber where this conversation took place lay deep within the palace complex, its walls decorated not with the usual scenes of royal triumphs, but with mundane images of grain counting and tax collection. Perfect camouflage for clandestine meetings among high officials. "Pharaoh's movements are his own affair," replied Meritaten, the second priest of Amun, though her tone suggested she found the pattern equally troubling. "Divine will requires no explanation. divine will traditionally remains within temple and palace precincts, where it can be appropriately channeled. Ayret countered, setting aside a papyrus scroll covered in columns of precise hieratic script. These excursions disrupt established protocols and create uncertainties. The third figure in the room had remained silent until now, his fingers steepled beneath a chin that bore the carefully groomed beard of a high nobleman. Sengenmort, royal architect and distant cousin to the previous pharaoh, had more to lose than most if the young king's unconventional behavior continued. "What troubles me," he said finally, "is not the travel itself, but what or whom might be influencing these new patterns." Meritaten's eyes narrowed. "You suspect someone has the pharaoh's ear." "I suspect someone has more than his ear," Sengenmort replied delicately. "The marriage negotiations with the Mitanni princess have stalled. The betrothal contract with the daughter of the high priest of Memphis remains unsigned, yet no official explanation has been offered. Perhaps Amenhotep simply exercises the royal prerogative to delay," Ayret suggested, though her tone indicated she believed otherwise. "For 17 years I guided the education of our divine ruler," Sengenmort reminded them, authority ringing in his voice. "I know his mind. This hesitation is uncharacteristic. Something, or someone, has introduced new considerations. The implications hung heavily in the air. A pharaoh's choice of queen was never merely personal. It represented crucial political alliances, religious symbolism, and dynastic strategy. Any disruption to these carefully balanced equations threatened the interests of every powerful family in Egypt. "We require better information," Meritaten concluded, rising to indicate the meeting's end. "Discreetly obtained, of course. I have already taken certain measures," Sengenmort assured her, producing a sealed papyrus from within his robes. "This report details the pharaoh's movements during his last absence. It appears he visited a village some distance upriver, a place of no apparent strategic or religious significance." Ayret accepted the document with careful hands. "And who compiled this information?" "A loyal servant of Egypt's traditions," Sengenmort replied smoothly. "One who understands that even divine rulers benefit from proper guidance." As the conspirators departed through separate exits, none noticed the silent figure concealed behind a cleverly designed false wall, a feature known only to the royal family and their most trusted guardian. Amenhotep, royal vizier, waited until the chamber had been empty for several minutes before emerging from his hiding place. His aged hands trembled slightly as he secured a small scroll into his belt pouch, his own record of the treasonous conversation he had just witnessed. In his private chambers, Amenhotep unrolled the scroll on his writing table, adding this latest intelligence to his growing collection of troubling observations. For weeks, he had sensed shifting currents in the court, whispers that ceased when he approached, unusual patterns of messengers between noble houses, the subtle repositioning of key officials. Now his suspicions were confirmed. Factions were forming, united in their concern over the young pharaoh's unconventional behavior. "You were right to summon me," Nox's gruff voice came from the doorway, where the soldier had appeared without announcement, a privilege granted to very few. "Close the door, Pia," Peasant instructed, his voice low despite the thick walls. "The situation develops as we feared." Nox's weathered face remained impassive as the vizier summarized what he had overheard. Only the tightening of his hand on his sword hilt betrayed his concern. "They do not yet know of the woman, Pia," Peasant concluded, "but they suspect someone has captured the king's interest. It is only a matter of time before they discover more. He plans to see her again tomorrow," Not revealed, his loyalty to Amenhotep warring visibly, with his duty to protect the king. Peasant closed his eyes briefly, years of political calculation weighing possible outcomes. "We cannot forbid him. To do so would only harden his resolve." "Then what?" "We must control what his enemies learn," the vizier decided, reaching for a blank papyrus. "While we determine if this connection is merely a passing royal fancy or something more significant." Noct's expression darkened. And if it is more significant, Ptahhotep's aged fingers traced the royal seal impression on the document before him. The same symbol Amenhotep carried on his ring, the mark of divine authority that had governed Egypt for thousands of years. Then we must decide whether to protect it, he said gravely, or end it before greater harm comes to the two lands. The sun had begun to set outside, casting long shadows through the narrow windows. In the distance, temple priests chanted evening prayers to gods who had witnessed countless royal dramas play out across millennia. The pattern was always the same: power, ambition, intrigue. Only the players changed. Ptahhotep reached for his writing brush with renewed determination. If he could not prevent the coming storm, he could at least ensure his king did not face it unprepared. The full moon had waxed and waned twice since their first meeting. With each visit, the rhythm of their encounters had evolved into something approaching ritual. Amenhotep would arrive bearing small gifts that a merchant might reasonably acquire. Nefertari would welcome him with increasing warmth, and the hours would pass in conversation that ranged from village gossip to philosophical debates about the nature of the gods. Today they sat beneath the shade of a date palm behind her dwelling, a rare moment outdoors where the summer heat was wetted by a gentle breeze from the north. Nefertari's fingers worked deftly on a small loom. Not the large one that dominated her home, but a portable frame perfect for the intricate band taking shape beneath her skilled hands. "You never speak of family," she observed, not looking up from her work. "Has the merchant from the north truly no one who waits for his return?" Amenhotep watched the play of sunlight through the palm fronds, casting dappled shadows across the ground between them. These moments of simple beauty had become precious to him, all the more so because they existed outside the suffocating formality of court life. "My father died recently," he answered truthfully. "My mother lives, but we are not close." "And no wife?" The question was posed casually, but he noted how her fingers paused almost imperceptibly in their rhythmic movement. "No wife," he confirmed, though not for lack of suggestions from those who believe they know what would bring me happiness. A smile touched her lips at that. "Village elders are the same. Old Khepri mentions suitable young men whenever our paths cross, as though at 30 years I remain unaware of the options before me. And are they suitable, I mean?" The question emerged before he could consider its implications. Her eyes met his briefly, then returned to her weaving. "Suitable for someone, perhaps. Not for me." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the distant sounds of village life and the soft click of the shuttle passing through warp threads. Not had positioned himself at a respectful distance, his back to them as he maintained his vigilant watch. "I've been wondering," Nefertari said after a time, "about your trade routes." "Oh?" Amenhotep kept his tone neutral, though wariness flickered within him. "You appear without warning. Stay never more than a day. Bring gifts a common merchant could scarcely afford." Her hands continued their steady work, but her words carried gentle challenge. "Your companion stands guard like a royal protector, not a trade partner." And sometimes she hesitated, and he prompted. Sometimes when you speak of distant places, your voice changes, as though you've not merely visited them, but commanded them." Amenhotep felt his heart quicken. He had underestimated her perceptiveness, her attention to detail. Or perhaps he had grown careless, allowing his true self to emerge too fully in her presence. "Perhaps I simply appreciate the grandeur of our kingdom," he offered, the evasion feeling hollow even as he spoke it. Nefertari's fingers completed another row of intricate pattern before she replied, "Perhaps. Or perhaps Amenhotep the merchant carries secrets he cannot share, even with someone he visits when the moon grows full." The use of his name, his real name, though she couldn't know its full significance, struck him with unexpected force. In that moment, he nearly confessed everything. Consequences be damned. But royal discipline reasserted itself, the training of a lifetime holding back words that could never be unsaid. Instead, he reached into his traveling pouch and withdrew a small carved hippopotamus of blue Phaon. "For your home," he said softly. "The goddess Taurat, protector of women." She accepted the figurine with both hands, examining the craftsmanship with appreciative eyes. "Too fine for a merchant's casual gift," she observed, though her tone held no accusation. "Not too fine for a friend." Her smile at the word friend warmed him more than the afternoon sun. She set aside her small loom and reached for something tucked beside her. A simple woven bracelet of blue and gold threads, similar to the one she had given him before, yet more intricately patterned. "I've been working on this," she said, offering it to him. "The pattern is an old one, for protection during travel." As she tied it around his wrist, her fingers brushed against his skin, the brief contact sending an unexpected current through him. For a man accustomed to being untouchable, literally as palace protocol forbade casual contact with the divine person of Pharaoh, the simple human touch felt revelatory. "I shall wear it always," he promised, knowing he would need to hide it beneath royal cuffs of gold and lapis when he returned to the palace. "See that you do," she replied with mock severity. "I've put good fortune into every thread." The sun had begun its westward descent, signaling that his time with her must soon end. These partings had grown increasingly difficult, each one requiring him to step back into a deception that felt more burdensome with every visit. "When the moon grows full again," he began. "I will expect you," she finished simply. As they walked back toward her dwelling, the gap between them had narrowed from their first encounters. Not just physically, but in the easy understanding that had grown between them. She was no longer merely a fascinating subject, a window into the lives of his people. She had become essential, a person whose thoughts he valued, whose presence he craved. And therein lay the danger that Pahotep had warned of in careful, measured terms. A pharaoh could admire his subjects from afar. He could even care for their welfare as a shepherd cares for his flock. But to need one of them, to find himself counting days until he could return to a simple mud-brick home, this was unprecedented, dangerous, perhaps even destabilizing to the divine order that had sustained Egypt for millennia. Yet as Nefertari laughed at something he said, her eyes crinkling at the corners with genuine mirth, Imhotep found he could not bring himself to care about divine order or royal protocol or dynastic expectation. For the first time in his life, he was simply a man enjoying the company of a woman who saw him, truly saw him, despite his careful disguise. The royal gardens lay silent in the pre-dawn light, empty save for the pharaoh himself and the aged vizier who had served 3 generations of kings. Amenhotep stood with hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the sacred pool where lotus blossoms floated undisturbed on the mirror-like surface. "You understand what you are considering?" Ptahhotep asked, his voice pitched low, though no one could possibly overhear them at this hour. "I do." Amenhotep's reply was firm, without the hesitation that had marked similar conversations in recent weeks. "To reveal yourself to a commoner is unprecedented but not forbidden." Amenhotep completed the thought. "I have consulted the ancient texts myself." Ptahhotep sighed, the sound carrying the weight of his decades in royal service. "The texts speak of theological matters, Divine One. The practical implications are considerably more complex." A heron landed silently at the pool's edge, its reflection perfect in the still water. For a moment it was impossible to determine which was real and which was mere image, a duality that seemed fitting to Amenhotep's current circumstance. "I have lived 2 lives these past months, old friend," he said quietly. "The golden mask of Pharaoh and the simple disguise of a merchant. Only in the latter have I found something genuine." "You speak of the woman as though she were unique among your subjects," Ptahhotep observed carefully. "She is unique to me." Amenhotep turned to face his vizier direct. Her mind, her spirit, her understanding of the world, they bring clarity where before I saw only the reflections of my own power in others' eyes. The vizier's expression remained neutral, though concern shadowed his gaze. And if she rejects you once she knows the truth, if she feels betrayed by the deception, the question struck at Amenhotep's deepest fear, one he had pondered through sleepless nights between visits to her village. Then I will have lost something precious, he acknowledged, but to continue the deception would be to build a foundation on shifting sand. Peter-Hotep nodded slowly, recognizing the resolve in his king's voice. There are political considerations as well. Senenmut and his faction grow bolder in their opposition to any unconventional choice of queen. The priests of Ammon mutter about appropriate bloodlines for the next divine incarnation. Let them mutter, Amenhotep replied, a hint of steel entering his tone. I am Pharaoh, not they, indeed, divine one. And yet even Pharaoh must consider the stability of the two lands. A contentious succession benefits no one. The sun's first rays crested the eastern garden wall, touching the golden ankh pendant that hung at Amenhotep's throat, symbol of life, of continuity, of the eternal cycles that governed Egypt. What does your heart tell you, Peter? Not the vizier, but the man who has known me since childhood. The old man's face softened slightly, the mask of office slipping to reveal genuine affection. My heart tells me that in 30 years of service, I have never seen you transformed, as you have been these past months. There is a light in you that was absent before. Then you understand why I must do this. I understand, Peter-Hotep conceded, though I fear the consequences nonetheless. Amenhotep placed a hand on the vizier's shoulder, a rare gesture from Pharaoh to subject, even one as trusted as Peter-Hotep. Prepare the small royal barge, no ceremonial trappings, but bring the regalia in a secured chest. I will need to prove my identity. When? Today, before my resolve weakens or court politics intervene. As the vizier departed to make the necessary arrangements, Amenhotep remained by the sacred pool, watching as the garden slowly awakened to the new day. Servants would soon arrive to tend the plants and refresh the water. Courtiers would emerge to seek royal favor. Priests would come to perform the morning rituals required of the living Horus. But for this brief moment, he stood alone with his decision, perhaps the most consequential of his reign thus far. Later, as the royal barge slipped quietly downriver, Amenhotep sat in simple meditation, the small chest containing his royal regalia secured beside him. Na'at had positioned trusted guards at strategic intervals along their route, men whose loyalty to the king personally outweighed any political considerations. You should prepare yourself for either outcome, Na'at advised gruffly, breaking the silence that had persisted for much of their journey. Amenhotep opened his eyes, regarding his old friend with a questioning look. She may be overwhelmed by the revelation. She may feel deceived rather than honored, the soldier elaborated. Women can be unpredictable in matters of the heart. A small smile touched Amenhotep's lips. Speak from experience, do you? 3 wives have taught me much about the mysteries of the female mind, Na'at replied with surprising candor. Chief among those lessons, expect the unexpected. The familiar shoreline of Nefertari's village came into view, the humble dwellings appearing small and fragile compared to the monumental structures of Thebes. Yet Amenhotep found himself more anxious approaching this place than he had ever been entering the most sacred temple precincts. If she rejects me, he said quietly, we will depart immediately. No repercussions will come to her for speaking honestly to her pharaoh. Na'at nodded, understanding the unspoken command within the statement. As they secured the barge in a sheltered inlet, Amenhotep touched the woven bracelet hidden beneath his sleeve, Nefertari's gift, a talisman of the genuine connection he hoped would survive the day's revelation. The golden ankh at his throat caught the midday sun, gleaming with the divine authority that had been his birthright. Soon he would determine whether that authority would unite him with the woman who had awakened his heart, or forever separate him from the one person who had seen the man behind the god-king's mask. Nefertari's hands stilled on her loom when the familiar knock came at her door. Though she had been expecting him, their pattern of visits with the full moon now well established, Her heart quickened nonetheless. She smoothed her simple linen dress, touched the polished stone amulet at her throat for luck, and moved to welcome her visitor. "You've come earlier than usual," she observed, noting the position of the sun still high in the sky. Something in his bearing gave her pause, a tension in his shoulders, a gravity in his eyes that seemed different from previous visits. "I needed to see you," Amenhotep replied, his voice carrying an unfamiliar formality. Nuck stood closer than was his custom, his vigilant gaze sweeping the surroundings with heightened attention. "Is something wrong?" she asked, gesturing them inside with growing concern. "Not wrong," Amenhotep answered carefully. "But I have not been honest with you, Nefertari, and I can no longer continue in deception." The door closed behind them, shutting out the world beyond. Inside her simple dwelling, the familiar tools of her trade surrounded them: the loom, the dyed threads, the carved bone shuttles, objects of a life he had entered as a visitor, but never truly belonged to. "Please, sit," he requested, rather than taking his usual place on the reed mat. Weariness crept into her expression, but she complied, settling onto the low stool beside her work table. "You're frightening me with this solemnity. That is not my intention." He remained standing, seeming suddenly unsure, despite his earlier resolve. "I have come to tell you who I truly am. You are not a merchant." It was a statement, not a question. A sad smile touched his lips. "No, that was a necessary disguise. For what purpose?" He drew a deep breath. "To allow me to walk among my people without the barrier of protocol. To see Egypt as it truly is, not as my counselors wish me to perceive it." Understanding began to dawn in her eyes, along with the first flickers of disbelief. "You cannot mean—" Amenhotep nodded to Noct, who produced a small wooden chest from beneath his cloak and placed it on the table between them. The soldier then retreated to the door, standing guard with his back to the unfolding scene, offering what privacy he could for this momentous revelation. With deliberate movements, Amenhotep opened the chest. Inside, nestled on linen cushioning, lay the royal uraeus, the sacred cobra headdress worn only by the living embodiment of Horus on earth. "I am Amenhotep, fourth of my name, Pharaoh of Upper and Lower Egypt, living Horus, son of Ra." He spoke the words simply, without the ceremonial intonation that would have accompanied such a declaration at court. Nefertari's face drained of color. Her hands, always so steady at her loom, trembled visibly. "This cannot be," she whispered. "It is the truth I have hidden from you these past months." She rose suddenly, stepping back as though the space between them could somehow make the revelation less overwhelming. "Why? Why this deception? Was it amusing to toy with a simple village weaver, to collect experiences of common life like exotic souvenirs?" The hurt and betrayal in her voice cut him more deeply than he had anticipated. "No, never that. Then what purpose could this possibly serve?" Anger began to replace shock, her eyes flashing with indignation. "What game have you been playing?" "No game," he insisted, taking a step toward her, then stopping when she retreated further. "When I first came to your door during the sandstorm, I was indeed traveling in disguise to understand the true condition of Egypt. But every visit thereafter was because I could not stay away from you. From me." Incredulity filled her voice. "The ruler of all Egypt, living God, master of the two lands, drawn to return to a mud brick house and a woman who owns nothing more valuable than her loom?" "Yes." The simple affirmation hung in the air between them. She shook her head, moving to the window as though seeking escape. "I don't believe you. This is madness. Look at me, Nefertari." His voice had changed subtly, carrying for the first time the natural authority he had so carefully suppressed during their previous encounters. "Have I ever lied about anything else? About what I think, what I believe, what I feel?" Her back remained to him, her shoulders rigid with tension. "How would I know? If you could hide this, what else might be false?" The question struck at the heart of his fears. He moved slowly around the table until he could see her profile, though he maintained a respectful distance. "Everything between us has been real," he said softly. "More real than anything in my life within palace walls. With you, I am simply Amenhotep the man, not Pharaoh the divine office. That is why I had to tell you the truth, because what has grown between us matters too much to be founded on a lie." She turned to face him then, her expression a complex mixture of emotions he couldn't fully decipher. "And what exactly has grown between us, Pharaoh?" The title sounded strange on her lips, almost accusatory. "You know what has grown," he answered quietly. "You have felt it too. I have seen it in your eyes, heard it in your voice." A bitter laugh escaped her. "And what did you imagine would happen now? That I would fall to my knees in gratitude, that the divine ruler noticed a common woman, that I would join your collection of wives and concubines, honored to be the latest royal acquisition?" "I have no wives," he replied, wounded by her interpretation. "No concubines, and I did not come seeking your gratitude or your worship. Those I have in abundance already, and they mean nothing to me." "Then what do you want from me?" The question emerged as barely more than a whisper. "I want what we had before this moment," he answered, honestly. "Conversation without pretense, understanding without agenda, connection without the weight of crowns and titles between us." She looked from him to the royal headdress still displayed in its open chest, the gleaming gold and lapis lazuli, incongruously magnificent in her humble home. "You should leave," she said finally, her voice steadier than before. "I need time I cannot think clearly with you standing here, being both the man I have come to care for and Pharaoh," he completed for her, accepting the impossible dichotomy that now stood between them. "Yes." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking vulnerable in a way he had never seen before. "Please go," though every instinct urged him to stay, to explain further, to somehow bridge the chasm that had opened between them. Amenhotep recognized the wisdom in her request. With a gesture to Noct, he carefully closed the chest containing the royal regalia. "I will honor your wish," he said, moving toward the door. "But know this, Nefertari. Whether you see me again as merchant or as Pharaoh, the man who stands before you remains the same, and he will wait for your answer however long it takes." The clay pot shattered against the wall, fragments scattering across the packed earth floor. Nefertari stared at the broken pieces, her chest heaving with emotions too complex to name. It was an old pot, one that had been mended twice already, practical to sacrifice in her moment of turmoil. 3 days had passed since Amenhotep, Pharaoh, Amenhotep, living Horus, son of Re, had stood in her humble home and upended her entire understanding of the past months. 3 days of sleepless nights and distracted days, her fingers making uncharacteristic errors at the loom, her mind replaying every conversation, every glance, every moment shared. She knelt to gather the broken pottery pieces, her practical nature reasserting itself, despite her inner chaos. As she collected the fragments, a memory surfaced. Amenhotep, commenting on the simple blue pattern decorating the pot, asking about the local clay with genuine curiosity. Had that interest been real, or merely the studied observation of a king slumming among his subjects? A knock at her door startled her. For one wild heartbeat, she thought he might have returned, but the tentative pattern wasn't his familiar rhythm. "Nefertari, are you well, child?" The cracked voice of Khepri called from outside. She hesitated, reluctant to face anyone, yet knowing the old woman would not depart without assurance. With a steadying breath, she opened the door. Khepri's rheumy eyes assessed her sharply. "You look as though the underworld spirits have been visiting your dreams." "I'm fine, Mother Khepri, just tired." The old woman made a dismissive sound. "And I'm a young bride waiting for my wedding night." Without invitation, she shuffled past Nefertari into the dwelling. "The village wonders why you've not been seen at the well these 3 days. I had sufficient water stored and sufficient company." That merchant from the north has not returned. Khepri settled her bent frame onto a stool, clearly intending a proper conversation. The mention of Amenhotep sent a fresh wave of confusion through Nefertari. He will not be returning. The single syllable contained volumes of understanding. So that's the way the Nile flows. Nefertari resumed collecting the pottery shards, needing occupation for her restless hands. It's not what you think, isn't it? Khepri's weathered face creased in a knowing expression. I've seen how your eyes changed when speaking of him, how you arranged your hair before his visits. It doesn't matter now, Nefertari replied, depositing the broken pieces into a small basket for later disposal. Khepri studied her in silence for a moment. Something happened, something beyond a merchant's departure. The perceptiveness of the old woman was uncanny, honed by decades of observing human nature in their small community. For a wild moment, Nefertari considered telling her everything, that Pharaoh himself had sat in this very room, had shared meals at her table, had looked at her with eyes that saw beyond her station to something no one else had recognized. But such a confession would be madness. At best, Khepri would think her mind affected by fever. At worst, if believed, the knowledge could put them both in danger. He was not who he claimed to be, she said instead, offering a partial truth. Few men are, Khepri replied with the resignation of long experience. Was he married then, a criminal fleeing justice? Nothing so simple. Nefertari sank onto her sleeping mat, suddenly exhausted. He was someone important, far above my station. The connection between us was impossible from the beginning. I just didn't know it. Understanding dawned in the old woman's eyes. Child, you've lost your heart to a nobleman then. Higher, Nefertari whispered before she could stop herself. Khepri's eyebrows rose. A priest? One of the royal family? When Nefertari didn't contradict her, she sighed heavily. The gods are cruel to plant such impossible desires. He says it's not impossible. The words emerged unbidden. He wishes to continue, whatever this is between us. And you believe him? The question cut to the heart of her confusion. Did she believe him? Could she trust anything about their relationship now that she knew the fundamental deception at its core? I don't know what to believe, she admitted. He seemed sincere. But how can I trust my judgment when I was so completely deceived about who he was? Khepri's gnarled hand reached out to cover hers. Trust instead what he did, not what he said. Did he treat you with respect? Did he listen when you spoke? Did his eyes follow you with warmth or calculation? The questions prompted a flood of memories. Amenhotep helping her carry water from the well, listening intently to her opinions on matters great and small, the genuine delight in his expression when she shared village stories. Small moments of authenticity that seemed impossible to fake, even for one trained in royal duplicity. He sent a message yesterday, Nefertari revealed, gesturing to a sealed papyrus scroll on her work table. I haven't opened it. Fear holds you back? Khepri asked gently. Not fear. Nefertari stared at the scroll as though it might transform into a serpent. Once I read his words, I must decide. To believe or disbelieve. To pursue this madness or end it. And if you believe him, what then? Would you leave all this? Khepri's gesture encompassed the small dwelling, the loom, the familiar tools of her independent life. Would you enter his world, where you would always be the outsider, always watched, always judged? The question struck at Nefertari's deepest anxiety. She had built this life carefully, fighting for her independence when the village would have relegated her to dependency. The thought of surrendering that hard-won autonomy, of becoming defined primarily by her relationship to a man, even if that man was Pharaoh himself, filled her with profound unease. I don't know if I could survive in such a world, she whispered. Then perhaps the gods have given you your answer, Khepri said, rising slowly to her feet. At the doorway, she paused. Or perhaps they have simply presented you with your greatest test. The choice, as always, remains yours alone to make. After the old woman departed, Nefertari sat motionless, her gaze fixed on the sealed scroll that represented both possibility and peril. Beyond her doorway, the familiar sounds of village life continued. Children playing, women calling to one another, the distant lowing of cattle returning from pasture. Her world, safe, known, limited. With trembling fingers she reached for the scroll. Twilight softened the harsh edges of the desert landscape as Nefertari waited at the agreed meeting place. A small grove of date palms beside the river, far enough from the village to ensure privacy yet public enough to maintain propriety. Her decision to read Amenhotep's message, then to reply with her willingness to meet, had come after days of internal struggle. The sound of approaching footsteps drew her attention. She had expected a royal procession, guards, and attendants befitting Pharaoh's station. Instead, a solitary figure emerged from the gathering dusk. Amenhotep walked alone, dressed not in the merchant's garb of their previous encounters, nor in royal regalia, but in the simple linen kilt and sandals of an ordinary Egyptian nobleman. No Uranus adorned his brow, no ceremonial beard hung from his chin. Only the signet ring on his finger and his regal bearing hinted at his true identity. He stopped several paces away, respect in his posture. "You came. Your message was persuasive." She had read the papyrus scroll dozens of times, the elegant hieratic script expressing sentiments too personal to have been drafted by a court scribe. "I meant every word," he said quietly. A gentle breeze stirred the palm fronds overhead, their rustling providing a natural counterpoint to the charged silence between them. From somewhere in the distance came the melancholy notes of a reed flute, a shepherd entertaining himself as he guided his flock home for the evening. "You came alone," she observed, gesturing to the empty landscape around them. "Not entirely," he smiled slightly. "Nakht and several guards maintain a perimeter beyond your sight, but I wanted this conversation to be between us, not between Pharaoh and subject." "Can it ever be anything else?" The question emerged more vulnerably than she had intended. "Now that I know who you are." Amenhotep moved closer, though still maintaining a respectful distance. From within his simple garment, he withdrew an object that caught the fading light. A reed flute, similar to the one playing in the distance. "Do you remember our third meeting?" he asked. "When you spoke of village celebrations and I mentioned learning to play as a child." She nodded, the memory surfacing easily. "You said your father believed music essential to understanding harmony in all things. A rare truth among my careful half-truth." He raised the flute to his lips and began to play, not a formal court melody, but a simple folk tune she recognized from village festivals. His fingers moved with practiced ease, the notes pure and true in the evening air. The unexpected gesture pierced through Nefertari's carefully maintained composure. This was no royal performance designed to impress, but a genuine offering, a reminder of the man she had come to know before learning his title. When the melody ended, he lowered the instrument. "The truth of who I am lies not in my crown, Nefertari, but in moments like these. In conversations shared over simple meals, in the way your weaving patterns taught me to see beauty in everyday objects, in how your directness challenged me to think beyond palace walls. You speak as though we are equals," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Yet the distance between us spans more than title. Different worlds, different destinies. Perhaps that is precisely why the gods brought us together." He took another step forward. "You see Egypt, as I cannot. I move in realms you have never witnessed. Together, our vision could be complete." "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked, though she already sensed the answer. "Come to Thebes," he said simply, "not as a concubine or temporary diversion. Customs I have never embraced, but as my chosen queen." The audacity of the suggestion stole her breath. "That's impossible. The nobles would never accept a common weaver as. They will accept my choice or face my displeasure," he interrupted, authority momentarily coloring his tone before he softened again. But I don't ask you to decide this moment. Come first as my honored guest. See the palace, the temples, the life that would be yours. Then make your choice with open eyes. And if I find I cannot belong in your world, she challenged, then I will respect your decision and trouble you no further. His expression revealed the cost of this promise. But I ask that you give us this chance. Nefertari turned toward the river, gathering her thoughts as she watched the current's steady flow. The magnitude of what he offered, both the privilege and the burden, seemed impossible to fully comprehend. I would need assurances, she said finally, turning back to face him. Name them. I would not be a decorative queen, silent and obedient. My thoughts, my perspectives, the very qualities you claim to value, must remain my own. He nodded without hesitation. I would expect nothing less. I would continue my weaving, not as mere pastime, but as a connection to who I was before. A chamber with the finest light would be yours for that purpose. She took a deep breath, voicing her deepest fear. And I would need to know that this is not merely the passing fancy of a king, accustomed to having whatever catches his interest. That when the novelty of a common-born queen fades, I will not be set aside. Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability he had rarely shown, even as the merchant Amenhotep. What exists between us is unlike anything I have known, he said softly. I cannot predict the future any more than you can, but I offer you this vow. You will never be valued less than you are at this moment. The sincerity in his voice reached past her doubts, touching something that had begun to awaken during their many conversations. Not merely attraction or fascination, but understanding, a recognition of kindred spirits, despite vastly different circumstances. 1 week, she said finally. I will come to Thebes for 1 week, to see with my own eyes what such a life might mean. After that I will give you my answer. Relief and joy transformed his features. Then I shall count each hour until your arrival. From within his garment, he produced a small golden ankh, the symbol of life, of continuity. Will you accept this as token of my pledge? As she reached to take the sacred symbol, their fingers brushed. The simple human contact, free from the weight of protocol that would normally surround the divine person of Pharaoh, seemed to bridge the vast distance between their worlds more effectively than all the words they had exchanged. 1 week, she repeated, closing her hand around the golden ankh, to determine if a weaver can become a queen without losing herself in the transformation. The last light of day faded from the western horizon, stars emerging in the deepening blue above. In this liminal moment between day and night, between commoner and royalty, between past certainties and future possibilities, they stood together, equally vulnerable despite the cosmic imbalance of their stations. The royal barge glided silently across the sacred lake of the temple complex, its gilded prow gleaming in the morning sunlight. Nefertari stood at the vessel's edge, struggling to maintain her composure as the full magnitude of Thebes unfolded before her. Massive temple pylons rose like mountains carved by the gods themselves. Avenues of sphinxes stretched to the horizon. Obelisks pierced the sky, their gold caps catching the sun's rays and casting them back with divine brilliance. Overwhelming, isn't it? Amenhotep's voice came from beside her, pitched low enough that only she could hear. I still find it so, despite having grown up among these monuments. Words failed her. How could she describe the humbling realization of her own insignificance against such grandeur? The terror that she, a simple village weaver, had been brought to walk among these expressions of eternal power. His hand briefly touched hers, a gesture hidden from the attendants and guards that surrounded them at a careful distance. Remember that men built these stones, men like those in your village, working with their hands, following orders. The structures may be divine, but those who created them were as human as you and I. The observation steadied her somewhat, though nothing could have fully prepared her for the reception that awaited at the palace dock. Rows of officials stood in perfect hierarchical order, priests in their leopard skins, nobles in their fine linens, servants with eyes carefully lowered. The protocols were so elaborate that Pahotep had spent an entire evening coaching her on the basics of court etiquette. "Smile," Imhotep murmured as the barge docked. "They fear you almost as much as you fear them." "That seems unlikely," she whispered back, straightening her spine nonetheless. "You arrive unannounced, from outside their carefully structured world, with the Pharaoh's evident favor. Trust me, they are terrified." As they processed from the dock into the palace proper, Nefertari felt the weight of countless stares, some curious, others openly hostile. She focused on maintaining the dignified bearing Pahotep had instructed, neither too humble nor too proud, her gaze directed forward rather than meeting the evaluating looks that followed her progress. The women's quarters had been prepared for her arrival, a suite of rooms larger than her entire village home, attended by servants who seemed to materialize silently whenever she glanced in their direction. The luxury was suffocating. Gold-inlaid furniture, linen so fine it seemed to float rather than drape, cosmetics and perfumes in alabaster containers that themselves were worth more than she would earn in a lifetime of weaving. "These women will assist you in preparing for the evening banquet," Hotep explained, gesturing to the attendants who stood with heads bowed. "They have been personally selected by the Divine One to ensure your comfort, to ensure her transformation, more likely." Nefertari noted the assessing glances the female attendants exchanged when they thought she wasn't looking. They saw a project, not a person, a village woman to be polished into something presentable before the court. Once alone with these women, the dynamic shifted subtly. The eldest stepped forward, her lined face revealing nothing. "If the honored guest would permit, we must begin preparations immediately. The royal hairdresser awaits, and the fitting for proper attire cannot be delayed." "What is your name?" Nefertari asked. The question clearly startled the woman. "I am Satia, chief lady's maid." Her tone suggested the information was irrelevant. "And these others?" Nefertari gestured to the remaining attendants. Confusion flickered across Satia's face. "They are the bath attendants, the cosmetic mistress, the jewelry keeper. Their names," Nefertari clarified gently. A moment of silence followed, broken only when one of the younger women spoke. "I am Tia, mistress. This is Henet, Mirit, and Nebet." Satia's disapproving glance at this breach of protocol was unmistakable, but Nefertari smiled at the young woman. "Thank you, Tia. I prefer to know who attends me. Now please explain what these preparations entail before we begin." Her request for explanation rather than simply submitting to their ministrations clearly disrupted established patterns. Satia's lips thinned slightly. "The Divine One has commanded a banquet to introduce you to the court nobility. You must be properly attired and presented in a manner befitting someone the Pharaoh honors." The hesitation before the final phrase spoke volume, not befitting a queen or even a royal guest, but merely someone receiving Pharaoh's attention, a temporary curiosity perhaps, but not a permanent fixture. As the elaborate preparations began, the ritual bath, scented with lotus and myrrh, the application of cosmetics by a woman who treated the task with religious solemnity, the careful arrangement of her hair into a style deemed appropriate, Nefertari observed the interactions among the women with growing clarity. They served her body while their whispers served the palace's insatiable hunger for information. "Has she been told about the Mitanni princess?" one murmured to another, while selecting jewelry, clearly believing Nefertari couldn't hear. "Hush," came the swift response. "Remember what happened to Renard for loose talk? When finally adorned in garments of fine linen and gold, weighted with jewelry that made movement a conscious effort, Nefertari caught sight of herself in a polished bronze mirror. The reflection showed a stranger, a woman transformed into a palace creation, her natural features enhanced yet somehow diminished by the elaborate styling. A discreet knock preceded the arrival of a royal guard. "The Divine One sends this gift for his honored guest," the man announced, presenting a small box with appropriate reverence. Inside lay a delicate vial of blown glass, containing a substance so dark it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Cecia's sharp intake of breath confirmed its significance before the guard explained. Royal coal, made from the secret formula known only to Pharaoh's personal apothecary. It is said to protect against evil and allow one to see beyond ordinary sight. As the guard departed, Cecia moved to apply the precious substance to Nefertari's eyes, but she gently took the applicator herself. "I will do this." The small assertion of independence clearly disturbed the established order, but Nefertari held firm. If she surrendered every aspect of herself to their ministrations, what would remain of the woman Amenhotep had valued for her authenticity? The palace chamberlain arrived as she finished, his expression betraying nothing of his thoughts about this unusual guest. "The Divine One awaits. If the Thern lady will follow me." As she moved to leave, a servant entered with hurried steps, whispering urgently to Saya. The chief lady's maid's expression darkened momentarily before smoothing into professional neutrality. "Is something wrong?" Nefertari asked. "Nothing that need concern you," Saya replied with practiced deflection. "Merely a small matter of household management." But as they proceeded toward the Great Hall, Nefertari noticed increased activity among the guards, their postures more alert, their hands closer to weapons. Something had changed. Some new tension had entered the carefully controlled palace atmosphere. The chamberlain paused before massive cedar doors inlaid with gold and ivory. "The Divine One has commanded that you be announced with all honor," he informed her, though his tone conveyed his personal reservations about this unprecedented situation. Behind those doors waited the assembled nobility of Egypt, the most powerful, most judgmental audience before whom she would ever stand. Yet Nefertari found herself less concerned with their imminent scrutiny than with the subtle undercurrents she had detected. The whispered comments about a foreign princess, the sudden alertness among the guards, the message that had disturbed Satia's composure. In this golden cage of power and protocol, danger wore a courteous smile and whispered behind painted fans. She straightened her shoulders, touched the golden ankh hidden beneath her elaborate collar for courage, and nodded to the chamberlain. The massive doors swung open. Dawn found Nefertari already awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor of her opulent chamber. She had dismissed the night attendants, needing solitude after the overwhelming experience of the previous evening's banquet. Before her lay a simple wooden box containing the few possessions she had brought from her village. Items deemed too humble by the palace servants to be displayed, yet treasures she refused to relinquish. With careful hands she removed her weaver's shuttle, a plain clay cup, and finally the simple linen dress she had worn when Amenhotep first appeared at her door during the sandstorm. She spread the garment across her lap, its rough texture a stark contrast to the diaphanous royal linens that now filled her wardrobe. 3 days, she murmured to herself. 3 days in this golden cage, and already I struggled to recognize my own thoughts. The banquet had been a masterclass in subtle warfare. Nobles had approached with perfect courtesy while their eyes evaluated her for weaknesses. Conversation flowed like honey, sweet on the surface, but designed to trap the unwary. Through it all, she had maintained the quiet dignity that was her natural character, neither attempting to match their sophistication nor retreating into intimidated silence. Amenhotep had watched her with evident pride, though protocol kept him enthroned at a distance for much of the evening. Only once had they managed a private exchange, in a brief moment between ceremonial presentations. "You navigate these waters with remarkable skill," he had murmured. "I merely observe before speaking," she had replied. "A habit learned at the loom, where one mistake can ruin weeks of work." His smile had been genuine, a flash of the man she knew beneath the royal persona. "Continue observing. You see things I cannot." A soft knock interrupted her reverie, not the deferential tap of servants, but something more urgent. She quickly covered her village dress with a shawl before calling permission to enter. To her surprise, Tia, the young attendant who had dared share names, slipped through the door, her expression tense. "Forgive the intrusion, mistress, but I thought you should know," the girl whispered, glancing nervously at the doorway. The ladies of the northern wing speak freely, believing I understand only enough to follow orders. Nefertari gestured for her to continue. They say the Mitanni princess arrives within the month, that her father's ambassadors threaten to withdraw military support if the marriage alliance is not honored. Tia's voice dropped, even lower. They say your presence is a complication that certain parties intend to resolve. By what means? Nefertari asked, keeping her voice steady despite the chill that ran through her. They did not say directly, but a servant who displeased Lady Arat last season was found near the crocodile pools. The young woman's eyes conveyed what her words did not. Nefertari nodded, understanding both the warning and the risk Tia took in delivering it. Why tell me this? A flush colored the girl's cheeks. My mother was a weaver in Essen. When she took fever, no one would help, except a traveling woman who shared her medicines and knowledge freely, asking nothing in return. She described this son who saved her. When I saw you, she trailed off, clearly uncomfortable with such personal disclosure. Thank you, Tia, Nefertari said simply. I will remember both your loyalty and your discretion. After the girl departed, Nefertari sat motionless, weighing this new information against her observation. The subtle hostility from certain court factions now made more sense. She wasn't merely an unsuitable companion for Pharaoh, but a direct threat to international alliances that had been years in the making. Rising with sudden determination, she changed from her night robe into the simplest day dress among her new wardrobe. Over this, after a moment's hesitation, she draped her village shawl, a silent declaration of her true self amid the palace artifice. The palace was stirring to life as she stepped into the corridor, nodding to the guards who watched her with poorly concealed surprise. Royal guests, especially women, rarely walked the palace unescorted. She ignored their discomfort, moving with purposeful steps toward the one place she had noted during yesterday's formal tour, the weaver's workshop. The vast chamber hummed with quiet activity as dozens of women worked at looms of various sizes, creating everything from practical linens to ceremonial garments adorned with gold thread. Their supervisor, a stern-faced woman with calloused hands that spoke of decades at the craft, approached immediately, suspicion evident in her posture. This area is not appropriate for royal guests, she stated flatly. I am Nefertari, a weaver before I am anything else, she replied, keeping her voice low enough that only the supervisor could hear. I seek neither to inspect nor interfere with your work. I merely wish to observe craftswomen whose skill I deeply respect. Surprise flickered across the woman's face, followed by cautious reassessment. You claim knowledge of weaving. In answer, Nefertari approached the nearest loom, where a complex pattern of lotus blossoms was taking shape. Without touching the weaver's work, she gestured to a nearly invisible tension issue in the warp threads. If adjusted now, it will prevent breakage 3 hands' breadths further in the pattern, she observed quietly. The supervisor's eyes narrowed, then widened in reluctant response. You have worked a loom yourself. Since childhood, it is the foundation of who I am. Something shifted in the atmosphere, not acceptance precisely, but a subtle recategorization in the supervisor's mind. This was not merely Pharaoh's latest diversion, but someone who understood the discipline and artistry of their craft. I am Renette, the supervisor said finally. If you truly wish to observe, you may sit there. She indicated a simple wooden stool near a loom where an exceptionally fine piece was being created. Throughout the morning, Nefertari watched in silence, occasionally asking knowledgeable questions that gradually drew more open responses from the weaver. By midday, several were showing her their techniques without prompting, professional pride overcoming their initial reserve. When she finally rose to leave, Renette approached again. You are not what we expected, the woman admitted bluntly. I am rarely what anyone expects, Nefertari replied with a small smile. That has been both my burden and my strength. As she walked back toward her chambers, she noted the subtle changes in how palace servants regarded her. Whispers still followed, but with a different tenor. Word had spread of her mourning in the weaver's workshop, of how she had demonstrated knowledge rather than merely observing as a superior. In her chamber she found Satya waiting with barely concealed impatience. "There you are. The Divine One has requested your presence in the sacred garden. We must prepare you immediately." Nefertari raised a hand, halting the flurry of activity before it began. "I will wash and change my dress," she stated calmly, "but I will wear my own shawl, and my hair will remain as it is." Satya's expression suggested she was considering the relative merits of several sharp responses, but ultimately she merely bowed her head in reluctant acquiescence. "As you wish." Small victories, Nefertari thought, as she prepared to meet Amenhotep. Small assertions of self amid the powerful currents that threatened to sweep away her identity. She touched her village shawl, drawing strength from its familiar texture. If she was to navigate these dangerous waters, foreign princesses, political alliances, and courtiers who viewed her as an obstacle to be removed, she would do so as herself, not as a palace creation. The sacred garden bloomed with lotus flowers and rare plants brought from distant lands, their fragrance perfuming the air as Nefertari walked beside Amenhotep along a shaded path. Despite the tranquil setting, tension radiated from him, a subtle tightness around his eyes that she had learned to recognize during their many conversations. "Something troubles you," she observed quietly once they had moved beyond the earshot of the ever-present guards. A brief smile acknowledged her perceptiveness. "A delegation arrived from Nubia this morning. Their tribute is generous, but they bring complaints about our southern border governors that cannot be ignored. Yet this is routine for Pharaoh, is it not? Why does this particular delegation concern you?" He slowed his pace, ensuring their privacy for a moment longer. "Their leader, Panafer, was educated in Thebes as a diplomatic hostage in my father's court. He knows our customs, our weaknesses, and our court factions better than any foreign envoy, and he has specifically requested to meet the woman who has captured Pharaoh's interest." Nefertari absorbed this information silently, understanding its implications. This was no casual diplomatic curiosity, but a calculated move to assess her influence and perhaps exploit it. "You can refuse," Amenhotep added. "I would give you more time to adjust to court life before facing such a test." She shook her head. "If I am to understand what life as your queen might entail, I cannot hide from its challenges." After a pause, she added, "Tell me about this Panafer and what he truly seeks." Relief and pride mingled in Amenhotep's expression. As they continued walking, he described the complex relationship between Egypt and its southern neighbor, the delicate balance of trade, tribute, and military posturing that had maintained peace for generations. "You will join us for the formal audience tomorrow," he concluded, as they approached the garden's end, where courtiers waited at a respectful distance. "Observe first. If there is opportunity for you to speak, I will signal it." The audience chamber hummed with suppressed excitement. The following day, word of Nefertari's inclusion had spread rapidly, and nobles positioned themselves for optimal views of both the Nubian delegation and Pharaoh's unprecedented guest. Amenhotep sat upon the royal throne, the ceremonial crook and flail crossed upon his chest, his expression an impassive mask of divine authority. At his direction, Nefertari had been seated not on a lesser throne as would befit a queen, but on a cushioned chair positioned slightly to the side, present but with no defined official status. The Nubian delegation entered with measured steps, their leader immediately identifiable by his regal bearing and the subtle fusion of Egyptian and Nubian elements in his attire. Panafer was tall, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing as he performed the required obeisance before Pharaoh. The formal exchange of greetings and presentation of tribute proceeded according to ancient protocols, with court scribes recording every word and gift. Only when these rituals concluded did Panafer raise the true purpose of his visit. "Divine Horus," he began, his Egyptian speech perfect though flavored with the musical cadence of his native tongue. "My king sends word of troubling developments along our shared border. Your governor at Elephantine imposes new taxes on Nubian traders that violate our long-standing agreements. Senenmut, speaking as Pharaoh's voice, responded with diplomatic precision. The living Horus maintains all traditional friendships with great care. If misunderstandings have occurred, they will be investigated. Panifer's tone remained respectful, but a subtle edge had entered it. When my countrymen's goods are seized and their boats prevented from returning home, we see not misunderstanding but deliberate provocation. The exchange continued, growing increasingly tense as specific grievances were enumerated and met with carefully worded deflections. Nefertari observed not just the speakers but the reactions of the Egyptian court, the barely concealed satisfaction from some quarters, the genuine concern from others. This was not merely a diplomatic incident, but a factional struggle playing out through foreign policy. Her attention was drawn to a detail others seemed to have overlooked. Among the tribute gifts displayed before the throne was a bolt of unusually patterned cloth that she recognized as distinctively Nubian. The weaving technique was sophisticated, using materials that Egypt valued highly. When a momentary impasse in the negotiations created a natural pause, Amenhotep made the subtle gesture they had agreed upon, an opportunity for her to speak if she chose. "If Pharaoh permits," she said, her voice clear and measured, "I would ask Envoy Panifer about the remarkable cloth included among his gifts." Surprise rippled through the court at her unexpected intervention. Panifer turned toward her with carefully controlled curiosity. "You have a discerning eye, lady. This is the sacred pattern of my king's ancestral house, woven by our most skilled cateswomen. The technique is exceptional," she continued, rising to approach the displayed tribute. "We have nothing comparable in Egypt, though our weavers might learn much from studying it." Panifer's expression shifted subtly, interest replacing diplomatic caution. "You understand weaving, then? It has been my life's work since childhood." Without royal self-consciousness, she knelt to examine the fabric more closely. The border pattern particularly. It achieves with a single shuttle what our methods would require 3 to create. A genuine smile broke through Panifer's diplomatic facade. "My sister oversees our royal weavers. She would appreciate such knowledgeable recognition of their artistry." What followed was a brief but technical discussion of weaving methods that left most of the court bewildered, but created a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The Nubian envoy now addressed Nefertari directly, with growing animation. "Perhaps," she suggested eventually, returning to the diplomatic issue at hand, "the confiscated goods at Elephantine include textiles of similar value, so their worth may not be properly understood by officials accustomed to assessing more common trade goods." Panifer nodded slowly. "That is indeed part of our complaint. Items of cultural and spiritual significance have been treated as simple merchandise. If Pharaoh were to send someone knowledgeable in such matters to reassess the situation," she let the suggestion hang delicately in the air, neither presuming to direct policy nor retreating from the opening she had created. Amenhotep leaned forward slightly on his throne. "A wise observation. Perhotep, prepare a decree appointing a special envoy to Elephantine, someone with understanding of both administrative and cultural concerns." The audience concluded shortly thereafter, with arrangements made for further discussions the following day. As the Nubian delegation withdrew, Panifer paused before Nefertari with a respectful inclination of his head, a gesture offered to an equal, not a curiosity. When the chamber had emptied of all but the closest royal advisors, Amenhotep descended from his throne, the formal mask of Pharaoh giving way to undisguised admiration. "You found common ground where our finest diplomats saw only conflict," he said loud enough for all present to hear. "And you did so through knowledge they considered irrelevant to matters of state." Sunanmut, who had observed the proceedings with increasingly ill-concealed displeasure, stepped forward. "Divine One, while the lady's intervention was fortuitous, we must consider whether foreign envoys should be encouraged to address royal guests directly. Protocol exists for good reason." "Indeed it does," Amenhotep replied, his tone pleasant, but with steel beneath. "To serve Egypt's interests." Today, those interests were well served. He turned to the ancient royal scepter mounted on the wall behind the throne, symbol of authority passed down through countless generations. Sometimes, Sun and Moot, new hands bring fresh vision to old problems. The pointed observation silenced further objections, though Nefertari noted the calculating glances exchanged among certain court officials. She had passed this test, but in doing so had transformed herself from mere curiosity into a potential threat to established power structures. That evening, as palace gossip raced through every corridor and chamber, she sat alone in her quarters, fingering the simple wooden shuttle she had brought from her village. The shuttle had guided threads to create beauty from chaos. Today, her words had attempted the same with a diplomatic tangle. The path ahead remained uncertain, but for the first time since arriving at the palace, Nefertari felt not just observed, but seen. The royal temple of Hathor echoed with the soft chanting of priests, preparing for the morning ritual. Nefertari knelt before the goddess's shrine, alone save for the single priestess who had guided her to this private alcove, before withdrawing to a respectful distance. After 6 days in the palace, Nefertari had made her decision regarding Imhotep's proposal, but tradition demanded prayer and purification before such momentous choices. The week had transformed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. Each challenge, from the skeptical court to the diplomatic test with the Nubians, had revealed new aspects of both the royal world and her own character. She had found unexpected allies among the palace weavers, the kitchen servants, even certain nobles who valued competence over bloodlines. Tomorrow would bring the sacred ceremony where she would formally accept Imhotep's offer to become his queen. The wedding crown already rested in the temple sanctuary, blessed by the high priest himself, a concession won only after Imhotep had threatened to perform the royal marriage rites without traditional religious sanction. As she rose from her prayers, a movement in the shadowed colonnade caught her attention. The priestess who should have been watching had disappeared, replaced by a figure she recognized immediately. Ayret, overseer of the royal treasury and one of the court's most influential women. "Forgive my intrusion upon your devotions," Ayret said, her voice smooth as oil. "But some matters cannot wait upon ceremony." Nefertari inclined her head in acknowledgement, but remained silent, sensing the danger that radiated from this seemingly polite encounter. "You have accomplished much in your brief feme among us," Ayret continued, moving closer, "from village obscurity to royal favor in mere months. An impressive achievement." "I sought none of this," Nefertari replied simply, "which makes it all the more remarkable." Ayret's smile did not reach her eyes. "Yet I wonder if you fully appreciate the complexities of what you embrace." "Speak plainly, Lady Ayret. We both know this is no chance meeting." The older woman's expression hardened momentarily before smoothing into practiced diplomacy. "Very well. Egypt stands at a crossroads. The Mitanni alliance represents generations of careful negotiation, military advantage, and trade security. Yet Pharaoh seems prepared to discard these benefits for personal considerations. For love, Nefertari corrected quietly, a concept perhaps unfamiliar in royal marriages, but no less powerful. "Love," Ayret repeated, as though the word tasted foreign on her tongue. "A lovely sentiment for village tales, but a poor foundation for matters of state. The nobles will not accept it. The priests already whisper of divine disfavor. The army generals question whether a king swayed by emotion can lead them in war. You presume to speak for many powerful voices. I speak for Egypt's stability." Ayret moved to the shrine, running her fingers along the golden offering table with proprietary familiarity. History teaches that when Pharaoh places personal desire above traditional alliances, chaos follows. The divine order, Ma'at itself, demands balance between royal authority and established power. Nefertari recognized the implicit threat beneath the philosophical veneer. "And you believe my presence disrupts this balance?" I know it does. Aret turned, dropping all pretense of diplomatic niceties. But unlike others who merely plot and whisper, I offer a solution that preserves your life and grants you continued royal favor. Continue, Nefertari said, her voice steady despite the chill that ran through her. Withdraw your acceptance of marriage. Become instead the great royal favorite, honored, protected, wealthy beyond imagination. Pharaoh may still visit your bed when he desires, while fulfilling his duty to Egypt through political marriage to the Mitanni princess. The calculated insult of the proposal, reducing her relationship with Amenhotep to mere physical convenience, struck deeper than Nefertari allowed her expression to reveal. And if I decline this generous offer, Aret's smile returned, colder than before, then I cannot guarantee your safety. Accidents befall even those under royal protection. Poisons find their way into the most carefully guarded chambers, and grief-stricken kings are easily manipulated by those who remain to comfort them. The threat hung in the air between them, its audacity almost admirable. In that moment, Nefertari understood that this confrontation had always been inevitable, not just with Aret, but with the entrenched power structure she represented. You miscalculate, Lady Aret, she said finally, her voice low but clear in the temple's hushed atmosphere. Not about your influence, which I do not doubt, but about mine. Confusion flickered briefly across the noblewoman's face. You see me as I was, a village weaver with no connections, no understanding of court politics, Nefertari continued. But that woman no longer exists. In her place stands someone who has learned quickly, observed carefully, and prepared for exactly this conversation. She moved toward the colonnade, where a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness. Amenhotep stepped forward, his aged face grave as he emerged into the temple's filtered light. The royal vizier has heard every word of your proposal and your threats, Nefertari said quietly, as have the temple guards stationed behind those pillars on his orders. Aret's composure faltered for the first time, her eyes darting to confirm that armed men indeed stood at strategic positions throughout the sacred space. Did you truly believe I would come unprotected to morning prayers after the warnings I received, after the accidental brazier fire in my chambers, after the servant who tasted my wine fell convulsing to the floor? Amenhotep stepped forward. Lady Aret, you are summoned to explain these matters before Pharaoh. Come willingly, and you may yet preserve your dignity, if not your position. Rage and disbelief warred in Aret's expression. You would take the word of this commoner over mine, I whose family has served the royal house for 7 generations. I take the evidence of my own ears, the vizier replied implacably, and I act on Pharaoh's explicit instructions regarding threats to his chosen bride. As the guards moved to escort Aret from the temple, she turned one last venomous glance toward Nefertari. This changes nothing. The court will never truly accept you. You will always remain an outsider, tolerated only because of his infatuation. Nefertari met her gaze steadily. Perhaps, but I would rather be respected for my true self than accepted for a false one. When they had gone, leaving her alone in the sacred space, Nefertari returned to the shrine of Hathor, goddess of love, music and maternal care. The polished gold of the offering table reflected her face, transformed by recent events, yet still recognizably her own. Give me strength, she whispered to the goddess, to build something new without destroying what must be preserved. Outside, the first rays of sunrise gilded the temple columns, casting long shadows across the ancient stones. In the palace beyond, preparations continued for tomorrow's ceremony, a wedding that would challenge centuries of tradition, yet perhaps forge a stronger bond between Pharaoh and people than any political alliance could achieve. The wedding crown awaited, its weight both literal and symbolic. Nefertari squared her shoulders, ready at last to bear it. Golden light flooded the great temple of Amun, casting divine radiance upon the assembled nobility of Egypt. Incense smoke, curled toward the towering columns, carrying prayers to the gods who had witnessed countless royal ceremonies across millennia. Yet even the oldest priests acknowledged that today's ritual departed from tradition in ways both subtle and profound. At the temple's heart stood two thrones, not the single seat of power with a lesser chair beside it, but matched symbols of royal authority, positioned side by side. Before them Amenhotep stood resplendent in the regalia of his divine office, the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, adding to his already impressive height. Beside him Nefertari waited with quiet dignity. Her transformation from village weaver to royal bride had been completed by the finest artisans in Thebes. Yet those who looked closely could detect elements that honored her origins. The distinctive blue thread pattern woven into her ceremonial robe, the simple wooden bead concealed among the gold and lapis lazuli of her necklace. The high priest of Amun raised his arms, his voice carrying to the furthest corners of the vast chamber. Behold, the living Horus takes the daughter of Egypt as his great royal wife, joining their cow for all eternity. The traditional words washed over Nefertari as she completed the sacred circuit around the altar, her steps matching Amenhotep's in the ritual dance that symbolized the union of divine and earthly realm. They had rehearsed for days, yet in this moment the movements felt natural, as though guided by something beyond palace protocol. When they finally took their places before the twin thrones, Amenhotep broke slightly with tradition, turning to face her before the assembled court rather than merely proceeding with the scripted declaration. "Before gods and mortals," he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone, though the words would be recorded by a dozen scribes, "I choose you not merely as wife, but as partner in all things. Your wisdom shall guide Egypt alongside mine. Your voice shall carry equal weight in council. This I decree not only as Pharaoh, but as the man who found truth in a simple home during a sandstorm." The personal addition to the ceremony sent ripples of reaction through the crowd, shock from traditionalists, approval from those who had witnessed Nefertari's growing influence, calculation from the politically minded reassessing power dynamics. As they seated themselves upon the twin thrones, the coronation ritual began in earnest. The crown of the great royal wife, modified at Amenhotep's insistence to incorporate elements symbolizing wisdom rather than merely fertility, was placed upon Nefertari's head by the high priestess of Hathor. "Rise, great royal wife, mother of Egypt, divine consort," the assembled priests intoned. But Amenhotep raised his hand, adding words no scribe had prepared. "Rise also as royal voice of the people, keeper of true justice, she who sees beyond palace walls." The unprecedented titles silenced even the whispers among the nobility. In that moment of hushed surprise, Nefertari felt the full weight of what she had accepted, not merely elevation to unimaginable privilege, but responsibility beyond anything she had envisioned when offering shelter to a storm-caught stranger. The remainder of the ceremony passed in a blur of ritual gestures, formal declarations, and symbolic offerings to the gods. Only when they processed from the inner sanctuary to the temple courtyard, where thousands of common Egyptians waited to glimpse their rulers, did Nefertari fully return to herself. The roar that greeted their appearance startled her. Palace officials had warned of potential unrest. The common people might reject a queen of humble origins, they cautioned. Yet the faces that turned toward her showed not rejection. Here was one of their own, elevated beyond imagining yet still connected to the life they understood. Without planning or royal approval, Nefertari stepped slightly forward from the prescribed position, raising her hand in acknowledgement of their welcome. The spontaneous gesture, breaking protocol yet again, drew an even louder response from the crowd. Beside her, Amenhotep smiled. "They see in you what I saw from the beginning," he murmured, as they continued the ceremonial procession. "The truth beneath the surface." Later, when the public celebrations continued in the city below, and the palace buzzed with the elaborate coronation feast, the newly crowned royal couple slipped away to a private garden courtyard. Here, removed from the weight of ceremony, they sat beside a simple pool reflecting the evening stars. "Are you overwhelmed?" Amenhotep asked, his formal speech patterns falling away now that they were alone. By the ceremony, the crown, or the 7 different plots Ptahhotep has already discovered against me, she replied with the directness that had first drawn him to her. He laughed, the sound unburdened by royal restraint. All of it, I suppose. She considered her answer carefully, not overwhelmed but fully aware of the task before us. What we attempt has never been done, a queen who speaks for the common people while wielding the authority of divine kingship. You doubt it can succeed? She shook her head, her elaborate crown temporarily set aside on a nearby bench. I believe it must succeed. Egypt cannot thrive with rulers who remain isolated from the lives of those they govern. Then we will make it so. He took her hand, the simple human contact more meaningful than all the ceremonial gestures they had exchanged before the gods. Beginning tomorrow. What happens tomorrow? She asked. I have arranged for us to visit your village, he replied, watching her face carefully for her reaction. Not as pharaoh and queen with all the trappings of majesty, but quietly, with minimal escort. I thought you might wish to show me your home through new eyes. The unexpected thoughtfulness of the gesture, understanding her need to reconnect with her foundations even as she embraced her new role, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Old Khepri will never believe it, she said with a smile, though she always claimed the gods worked in mysterious ways. In this case, through a sandstorm and a woman brave enough to speak truth to a stranger, Amenhotep replied softly. Above them, the stars continued their eternal procession across the heavens, witnessing another chapter in Egypt's unfolding story. Kingdoms would rise and fall, monuments would crumble and be rebuilt, but in this moment, something new had entered the ancient pattern, a thread of different color, woven into the fabric of divine rule, changing its design forever.